Hello and welcome back to the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. We are back for another episode. We're twice this week, Michael. We're double dipping here. It's been a busy week, obviously. Ben Johnson is the Bears head coach. Welcome into the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Sean Hammond. He's Michael Dwojak. We're joining you guys again to sort of recap our thoughts from yesterday's press conference. Ben Johnson was introduced. Obviously, he was the star of the show. He took the podium, answered questions for, about a half hour. And, I think he did pretty well. It doesn't really matter how you do in your first press conference. We've seen guys do well. We've seen guys with some interesting moments. Dan Campbell, Adam Gase come to mind. And really, it doesn't mean anything for the job. But it was his first impression. Michael, what did you think listening to Ben Johnson yesterday?
Listen, it went as well as you could have hoped, right? An intro press conference goes. There were no acronyms. There wasn't really like any stumbling or anything like that on words. No awkwardness. It felt like the perfect day for the Bears, right? It seemed like a couple weeks ago we were giving the Bears such a hard time, and rightfully so, just based on everything that's been going on. And yesterday felt like it was kind of like a good, like everyone was happy, like everyone was laughing along with Kevin Warren's jokes, with George McCaskey's jokes, and little dig at Joe Buck. So I mean, it was a good day, obviously, and I think everyone also acknowledged though that it was only one day, right? I
Yeah.
think Ben Johnson made it pretty clear that, listen, like this is just the beginning. We're getting started. And I think Kevin Warren, George McCaskey, even Caleb Williams, we talked to all of them too. And they kind of have the same refrain where like everyone's excited, but I think everyone in the building knows that the work's not done, that they're just getting started. And I think that's the biggest thing where, you can win the press conference, you can do well, you can say all the right things. But it felt like there was an acknowledgement and kind of a shift in tone compared to maybe what we've seen in the past. And time will tell at this point. But from the starting point, it was a good start. And now we'll see in the coming weeks, how this coaching staff comes together. And then obviously we'll get ready for free agency and the draft.
Yeah, rightfully so. It was a victory lap for the Bears, and I think that was deserved. I mean, sure,
Yeah.
you got the best coach on the market. Of course, you're going to pat yourself on the back. I think the Bears did a good job of letting Ben Johnson take the spotlight. I know that George and Kevin and Caleb all talked afterwards, but there wasn't, Ryan wasn't up at the podium with Ben. This was Ben's moment, and I think that was handled the right way. Ryan went up there and gave a very short intro, and then let Ben take the stage. And Ben said kind of the things that you would expect him to say. He's going to set the foundation. He's going to set the standard. We can dive into what his hiring is going to mean for Caleb and the quarterback and the offense. I thought it was notable, too, that he said he's not just going to bring the Detroit Lions playbook with him. And obviously, you have to sort of cater your offense to the players that you have. And this is going to be a long process. I mean, it feels like the Lions turned around in the blink of an eye, but that took time. And that offensive line, they got three of those guys were drafted in the first round dating back to 2016. Like that was a long process to get to where they are right now. And I think they all realize that kind of going off what you were saying, like obviously George has been here before. Ryan has been here before. He hired Matt Eberflus. Kevin has been here before. With his time with the Vikings when they hired a new head coach. You never really know how it's going to go, but it was rightfully so they could sort of take a victory lap yesterday.
I want to hit on something before we, really get into the nitty gritty of, what we heard yesterday. But I feel like the last two press conferences, it's been, yesterday it was Ben Johnson at the main podium and then everyone off to the side. Last 2 weeks ago, whenever that was, it was Ryan pulls up at the podium and then George and Kevin to the side. Do you feel, is that just me looking too far into things, or do you feel like they kind of heard about how bad the optics looked of Kevin, kind of stealing the show from Ryan Poles at the beginning of December? Or is that just like a happy coincidence and it just kind of worked out that way? Like, is that something that the Bears kind of learned from the public perception of how kind of things went after they fired Matt Eberflus?
No, I would imagine that was intentional. I mean, I think that they obviously hear the feedback, whether they will admit to that or not. Like they hear the feedback on some of this stuff, and You brought in Ted Cruz as a guy who was brought here to sort of be a big picture thinker in these situations. He deals a lot with Kevin Warren. I'm sure he was well aware of how that was perceived. And I think they adjusted, and I think that that's good. They should do that. You should give Ryan Poles the spotlight. When you're going into the coaching search, you should give Ben Johnson the spotlight on a day like yesterday. And I think that they handled that well. I think that, it's Ben's moment, and it had to be Ben's moment. And that's how it should have been. They all know that this is not going to be like one man's not going to come in here and fix everything. Like, it's going to have to be the organization. It's going to have to be the players buying into what Ben is saying. But yesterday was about Ben, and I think that they handled that the right way.
Yeah, and it feels like growth, right? Like, it kind of seems like they're learning, whether they'll admit it or not. It seems like they're learning right from their past mistakes, and they're like trying to transition and that sort of stuff. And for however little that is, some people might be like, well, who cares? Like, what does that really matter? It does kind of show that they're listening and they're trying to improve. So, want to give credit to them for obviously doing that. Whether that translates to wins, that doesn't really mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it just does feel like just an important thing, right? Just that this franchise, on top of the way that they kind of ran this process, flying in Mike McCarthy and that sort of stuff, it just feels like there's kind of been a switch, which has kind of been interesting to kind of watch compared to how business was done even a year ago or even a couple of years ago before Kevin Warren got here.
Yeah, definitely. Michael, we heard, of course, how much Ben Johnson wanted to be here in Chicago. He mentioned going to Cubs games with his family every summer and spending a weekend in the city. And obviously, he's got 3 young kids, and he was thinking, I think that's maybe something that we didn't talk about enough over the last 2 years with Ben Johnson is like, he was thinking about where he wants to raise his family. And when you're talking about Jacksonville and Vegas and Chicago, and I know most NFL cities are good cities. Like you can find a great place to live anywhere, but that was obviously a really important factor for him. Like, just spending time in Chicago and envisioning himself here. Obviously we didn't know he was spending time in Chicago in his summers, until he was up there, but clearly, we were saying this before we heard from Ben, and I think yesterday just confirmed it. Like, Ben picked the Bears as much as the Bears picked him.
Yeah, I feel like, in most press conferences, I mean, you'll never hear a new head coach being like, I didn't want to come here or anything like that. Obviously, he's going to love the place, but it did seem like, he made it quite clear, and I think George McCaskey said this, or whether it was Ryan Poles, that at the start of the Zoom, he said, I want this job. And then toward the end of the Zoom, he was like, by the way, did I mention that I wanted this job? Like, it's very clear that he was, whether it's all the different things we talked about, the Cubs games every single year, loving the city and that sort of stuff, or just loving Caleb and, the talent that's on this team. We questioned for the past couple of weeks whether this job was going to be the top choice for him.
Mm-hmm.
And very clearly it was. Like, he didn't come in for a second interview. He didn't have to come to Hallis Hall to see things, see all the facilities and that kind of stuff. Like, he was pretty dedicated to this, and I feel like that's exactly what you want. Not only do you want, obviously the top offensive mind to mold your young quarterback, but you want someone who, he called this place a sleeping giant, right? He saw this place for the past 6 years, twice a year. He saw what the Bears could be. And it seemed like he really believed in it. And it didn't feel like it was just kind of just stuff that you say at a press conference just to kind of get the new fans involved and kind of get everyone excited. It felt sincere, and it felt like there really was a history with it. So, that was the biggest thing, that it seemed like very clearly that he loved this. He wanted this job from the start, and that's kind of the reason why things came along so quickly. It became clear that the Bears wanted him right away, and it seemed like Ben Johnson wanted the Bears right away.
Yeah, and Ryan said in his session afterwards that, when the Lions lost on Saturday night, the Bears, there was no panic. Like, they were very prepared and knew what they needed to do. Clearly, as we all know, this week was supposed to be the second round of interviews. They didn't need to do that. Like, they were very confident that Ben was the guy. They had, from what Ryan said, just diving into the numbers and the analytics. Obviously, they loved what his offense was doing, and those Zoom sessions with Ryan and with George, only confirmed the communication aspect of it, which I think was something that needed to be better from the previous coaching staff. I thought it was interesting too that Ben mentioned in another session we had after the press conference that they did end of game scenarios. They would throw a scenario up on the screen on Zoom and ask the candidate, what would you do in this situation? And Ben said that was pretty unique. Like that's not something that every team does. I think that's a direct result of how bad their previous head coach was in those end of game situations. I thought that was an interesting little wrinkle. When you talk about like no stone unturned, like that's part of it too. Like you got to think of every possible thing you can ask these candidates. And that should be something that is involved with your coaching search. But yeah, obviously there was no panic with the Bears. They knew who they wanted and they went quickly after him. George said pretty bluntly, he said, Ryan said Ben's the guy. And I said, okay, let's get him here.
Yeah, you mentioned George. I think one of the biggest things that you kept hearing over the weekend was the dedication from the McCaskey family to make this happen, right? Like I think Ben mentioned it, Ryan mentioned it, and Kevin also, they all mentioned that, ownership is putting the money, they've realized that you need to put the money in where if you want to succeed, right? And I forget exactly who said the direct quote, but, you put in what you get. Like if you're not putting in a lot of money, you're not going to get the best coaching staff. And I think Kevin kept saying, like, crediting the McCaskies for stepping up in a situation like this, right? Like we don't know the specific contract situation for Ben Johnson, but I mean, he was the most sought out after coach, right? Like he's going to get a lot of money and he's going to get a lot of money to build his coaching staff if he wants to bring the top thing. So that felt really interesting that just, for how much I feel like the McCaskies, continuously have kind of gotten the impression that maybe they don't spend as much money as you want to for building a football team. And maybe that was a situation in the past. And maybe that's because Kevin Warren's kind of pushing them and saying, like, listen, like, this is what you need to do if you want to succeed. It's become very clear that, the McCaskies are willing to do what it takes to win. And I think that should have Bears fans. I see a lot of comments about who they're going to bring in the coaching staff. Like, I would not be surprised if they end up bringing some of the top coaches available, assistant coaches, because it seems like the Bears, are prepared to, pay as much money as possible for whatever Ryan and Ben think is best to, have this team succeed on the field in the coming year.
Yeah, I think they realize the importance of having veteran coaches to help out your first-time head coach.
Yes.
Whether that is a Dennis Allen or whether it's somebody else running that defense. I know Dennis Allen's name was out there. Nothing has been finalized with that. Ben mentioned yesterday that he's never met Dennis, so that's still that whole thing is still in flux. Like they're still figuring out what this is going to look like. A lot of people have pointed to Hank Fraley as a potential offensive coordinator. It sounds like maybe that's not going to be the case anymore. He's got options in Seattle and potentially in Detroit. We'll see where that goes. But yeah, they're going to have to, you're going to have to spend money to get good coordinators too. I mean, obviously we don't know what Ben's making, but from the sounds of it, I'm sure he's among the best paid coaches in the NFL and probably maybe the highest paid first-time head coach ever. I don't know if that's I don't know that for a fact, of course, but that's not a crazy thought given how popular he has been. And yeah, it's going to take money to bring in really good coaches. If you're with us here on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. That's a great way to support the show. We would really appreciate that. Leave us a review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple. A 5-star review would really, really help us out too. And keep an eye on our Twitter pages. We will let you know when we're going to go live. I see lots of thoughts and comments in the chat here. A couple that I wanted to get to. I know I missed a bunch already. Robert was asking about the players in attendance. Yeah, I just saw Caleb, DJ, Rome, and Cole. I don't know if anybody else was there. I did not notice them. Michael, did you see anybody else?
No, I think those are the only four.
The interesting little tidbit from that was that DJ, according to Caleb, DJ left his family vacation down in Orlando. And I know people were making a big deal about DJ's vacation comment in December. Clearly, he knows he heard the criticism of that. And look, this guy left his vacation to come listen to his coach give a press conference. That wasn't really necessary, Michael.
No, it wasn't necessary, and it's good to see, right? Like whether that means you're going to win on the field, like
Yeah.
what does that really mean in the grand scheme of things? But it's good to see that support, right? Like, and it's good to see Caleb wearing that Matrix thing. I know that became really popular yesterday with his trench coat, but it is good to see, and it kind of led to an interesting moment, right? Like during the press conference when
Yeah.
someone whether asked, I forget whether someone asked him or whether he brought it up himself, but he brought up accountability. Ben Johnson did, and he looked straight at the players and said like, you need to make sure you're getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Like, and talk like that wasn't like he wasn't looking at the reporter, he wasn't looking at the cameras, like he was looking right at the players. And how much is that? Like, obviously, I forget who, I think it was Eberflus who said like, get your track shoes on and
Mhm.
get ready to run. Like, what does that really mean in the grand scheme of things? But it did kind of feel like a listen, these players have talked about wanting accountability for the past year, right? And
Yeah.
it's very clear that, for how much of an offensive guru Ben Johnson is, he's also going to keep players accountable. And if players aren't being accountable, he said like, players are going to be made examples of if they're not doing what they need to be doing, right? Like the communication is going to be clear, the consistency is going to be required, and it's going to be pretty clear that these players are going to have a different set of circumstances than they did under Matt Eberflus, and it's become very clear that the vibe is going to be very different than it was even a year ago.
Yeah, the players were begging for more accountability, and that sort of stuff I think does have to come from the top. Like you can have a really good locker room, but if it's not coming from the top, things start to fall apart.
Yeah.
And so that's clearly something that they want, and that they want to be held to those standards. I think there was stuff probably going on behind the scenes that none of us got to see, that some players were unhappy with. You listen to the interviews in December, and it's pretty clear that there was some other stuff going on. Obviously, like the public manifestation of that was the fallout from the Tyreek Stevenson Hail Mary thing. Like we all saw that on national TV, watching the way that game ended, of course. And then, it was kind of like a slap on the wrist. He didn't start for one game, and his playing time dipped a little bit there for a couple of weeks. But then that was sort of the end of that. And you don't know how a different head coach would handle that differently. That's maybe just one public example of kind of what we're talking about. But yeah, I think Ben Johnson is going to keep that standard really high. And he made that clear, and he looked right at those players when he was saying that. That was a really interesting moment, Michael.
And that wasn't really by accident, right? Like I feel like it felt like a lot of his press conference, like I felt like subtly did stuff on purpose. Like, he talked about, competing in the NFC North, and, he talked about Dan Campbell and Kevin O'Connell being coaches of the year. And then like a second later, just happened to mention they liked being Matt LaFleur twice. Like that is a deliberate, that's like a smart way of being like, we're going to beat the Packers a lot, without saying like, we're going to beat the Packers a lot. Like it was very clear that, Ben Johnson came prepared for this press conference, and he had a lot of insightful things, like, whether he was talking about why he took the job. Like he mentioned the people, but he also said like having the quarterback helps. Like there is a lot of insightful stuff in there. And that accountability thing just was another thing where, he's very intentional with everything that he does. And that's become clear. And he kind of made that clear with every position that he's had in his career. He's obviously worked his hardest and tried to be the best he can at that position. And you're seeing that already, where he's very deliberate in what he's saying and what he's doing. And I think that's something the Bears fans can get used to as long as he's the head coach here.
Yeah, let's talk about that quarterback position, because obviously, you mentioned the moment where he's sort of talking to Caleb, and he said too at another point in time, or maybe it was the same question, that he had thoughts on Caleb's game and some of the things that they could do better. Obviously, that relationship is going to be really, really important. We heard from Caleb afterwards, and he made the jokes and referenced his prank call, the prank call that got him a couple or last week or whenever that was. And he said, like when Ben texted him, he sent him a selfie to confirm that it was in fact the real Ben Johnson. But all of that aside, like that relationship, Caleb clearly, I think, wanted Ben Johnson. I think that is he talked about wanting an offensive guy. And I think Ben has sort of been on Caleb's radar for a little while now.
He has been on his radar, and the stuff he talked about Caleb was really interesting, right? Like he he praised him. Obviously, he talked about he's got a great arm. He's able to, his confidence is great in there, and he talked about how he's able to get the ball in tight spaces, within the numbers, outside the numbers. But he was also, I feel like this was really important. Kind of talked about how he's going to kind of, for lack of a better term, like tear him down to bring him up, right? Like
Yeah.
he's going to focus on Caleb's mistakes, and that he already said that's already started, like stuff that he's noticed about Caleb's game, like for how great Caleb is. Like you saw, like the up and down that he had in his rookie season, like most rookie quarterbacks have. So I think it was really interesting just how pretty clear Johnson made it seem like, he loves Caleb, he loves his ability, but he also believes like we're going to get at the stuff that he's messing up on. Like we're going to focus on that. Like we're going to hit on that a lot, so he's not making those mistakes. And he said like they're going to spend a lot of time together in the spring and the summer during OTAs, mini camps, training camps. Like they're going to be joined at the hip a lot. So I thought that was really interesting. Just kind of talking about like it would be easy for him to say just like Caleb's great. He can, he's a great quarterback. I can't wait to work with him. But he mentioned that, but he also talked about how, like we're going to tear him down and we're going to bring him back up. Like we're going to find faults. And he said this about all the players, like we're going to find weaknesses in your game and we're going to make you better. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like you're only going to become better if you know what you're not good at. And that's really going to be huge in Caleb's development over the offseason.
Ben mentioned too, I thought this was really interesting, where he was talking about, he believes that, and maybe this isn't like anything surprising, maybe this isn't new, but I thought it was interesting the wording that Ben used when he was talking about the quarterback position and the fact that elite quarterback play is the biggest difference maker in the league. And he said like he believes over the last couple of years, for the first time in maybe 20 plus years, that it's overtaken even like turnover margin. Like you can still win. We see what the Chiefs are doing with Patrick Mahomes and these close games, and they're just finding ways to win largely because of that elite quarterback play. And I thought that the way he articulated that was super interesting. And it wasn't necessarily like he wasn't talking about Caleb when he said that, but it is quite an endorsement of what he believes Caleb could potentially be when he says that I came here, in part because of the quarterback. And at the same time, he thinks that the elite quarterback play is the biggest difference maker in this league, more so than at any time in NFL history, really. And that's not groundbreaking. I don't think that he's the first person to say that, of course, but I thought he came at that from a really interesting angle.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, right? Because like we know what it is right now. Quarterbacks are protected, right? And you don't win this in this league unless you have your franchise quarterback. Like, who is the last team that like won with like a mediocre quarterback? Obviously, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs have kind of dominated here in the last decade, whatever, since they drafted him. But you can't reach this weekend without having an elite quarterback, right? Like the four teams who are in championship weekend have an above average or an elite quarterback. Yeah. Like Patrick Mahomes is great. Josh Allen is great. Matthew Stafford and Jalen Hurts are all great quarterbacks, right? And then they build around that. So, the league has changed a lot, and that says a lot from Ben Johnson, just being able to kind of vocalize that and say, like, he's seeing what is happening around the league. Like he's obviously a very, for lack of a better term, nerdy guy. Like he comes from the computer science background. Like he's looking at the numbers, he's looking at the statistics and the trends and that kind of stuff. And I'm sure he's going to focus on defense. Like he wants to get those turnovers. He talked about that turnover ratio and how that used to be a key statistic. But the quarterback is what you need to do and succeed. And that's obviously a key reason why, he chose the job and why he thinks that this team can be really successful moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely true. And that seems to be the case with him. I see some comments, some thoughts in the chat wondering what's going to happen to Flus. He did interview with somebody, and it's escaping me now. Not for a head coach,
it was the Falcons, right?
Yes, it was the Falcons defensive coordinator.
They went with someone else.
I do think that he will wind up being a DC somewhere. It could be one of these Sports Chicago style throws out Jacksonville. It could be one of those teams that don't have a head coach yet. We'll have to see how things shake. I thought it was interesting that Jacksonville fired their GM yesterday, Michael. Did you see that one?
For how much of a hard time we give the Bears sometimes, I feel like the teams like the Jaguars and the Jets sometimes, and even the Raiders are just kind of like, oh, things could be much worse. Imagine like you didn't get Ben Johnson and then you decide to fire your GM. That just that doesn't make much sense.
I mean, we were sitting here a couple days ago talking about how bad the Cowboys handled this, and then never underestimate the ability of some of these teams to one up each other in just these dumb decisions. Obviously, they should have done that from the start. They should have fired the GM from the start. Now they're way behind, and they need a GM and a head coach. And clearly, I mean, that was sort of precipitated by Liam Cohen. Your guy, Michael, I know you wanted the Bears to interview him, saying that he was going to stay in Tampa. He was no longer interested in the Jacksonville job. Obviously, Ben preferred Chicago, and I think the Jaguars were taking the hint. It was pretty obvious that something was amiss down there.
Yeah, but where does that kind of leave you then? Like, then you got to find a general manager. Like, you got the Jets. Obviously, they hired Aaron Glenn yesterday, but they don't have a GM. Like, there's so much. I hear this a lot where it's just like, these are like billion-dollar entities, and some of them are just like run so poorly. And it's just like, how, like, if you were like a regular business that didn't consistently like get NFL like revenue sharing and money and that kind of stuff, like you'd be out of business. Like it is insane like how some of these NFL teams are run.
Rick Gonzalez just threw this in the chat. He says, any chance Hightower stays? I think there's a chance. We'll see. Special teams coordinators are one of those things where like they seem to stick around sometimes. It's less philosophy based in terms of like how offense and defense, you got to fit the right system and stuff. Like special teams, obviously those guys have ideas and thoughts and ways they like doing things. But I think there's a chance Hightower sticks around. I think he's worked for a couple of different teams now in that role. And I imagine if it's not Chicago, I imagine he'll get a special teams coordinator job somewhere. Michael, let's sort of wrap this up by just, we kind of mentioned it earlier. Ben says he's not going to just bring the Lions playbook over here. He's got to fit this thing to the Bears, to Caleb, to the offensive line that they have, to the receivers and the tight ends that they have. When we're looking at the offensive side of the ball, what do you want this thing to look like? Like what should the Bears offense look like with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams and all these guys?
Well, I think that he did a big thing, and he mentioned how like this offense is not going to look like Detroit's offense at all. Like they have different players, different personnel, different talents. And I think the biggest thing that we've seen from Ben Johnson during his time in Detroit was he takes advantage of what he has, right? Like he isn't like, this is my offense, you need to run it. Like he's well aware that, he needs to morph his game. And he said that, right? Like he said, I think the biggest thing for me was like, you're going to see balance in this offense, but you're going to see a balanced offense throughout the season, not necessarily during the game. Like he said, like there are some games where we're going to throw the ball 50 times because that's what's working. And there are some other times where we're just going to run the ball the entire game because that's what's working. Like I think the biggest thing is from this offense is you're going to see Ben take advantage of the matchups that he sees. He's going to take getting DJ into space and creating screens. I know everyone's going to hate the screen game, but if that's something that works against a team, he's going to exploit that, right? Like if you are seeing a team that can't really protect a run, like he's going to call that a lot with DeAndre Swift and Roshan Johnson. Like I think the biggest thing is from this offense is you're going to see like a relatively like same offense, obviously, but every game I feel like you're going to see a little bit something different. Like you're going to see him adapt to what the defense gives him. And sometimes you're going to take advantage of Caleb running the ball, right? Like sometimes you're going to take advantage of Caleb, getting a deep shot here or there. Like I think the biggest thing is that this offense is going to exploit whatever the defense isn't good at. And I think you have the playmakers to do that. Obviously you got DJ Moore, who's got speed. You got Cole Kmet who can block and, pass catch. So I think this offense is going to look different just based on what you're going to see the defense presenting. And I think that's going to make it really hard to defend throughout the year.
Ben Johnson did a really good job of building that Lions offense around Goff's strengths because we know that Goff can make some mistakes. Obviously, we saw that in their loss in the playoffs. And just the way that like things didn't work out those last couple of years in Los Angeles, like He's certainly not a perfect quarterback, and,
No.
and I don't know that there are very few perfect quarterbacks. But Caleb's very different. Caleb is a lot more. Rick has a comment here. Caleb is way more mobile than Goff. I am also very curious to see how Ben Johnson uses that, because that's going to be. I mean, that's a strength. Caleb can move. He can move. He's not going to run like Justin Fields ran, but at the same time, he's very mobile within the pocket. He's very creative outside of the pocket. I would imagine that they're going to find ways to move the pocket, left to right a little bit more than maybe they did this past season. And obviously, all of that is sort of predicated on having a better offensive line. We know that they need to improve. It doesn't really matter what you try to do. That's part of the reason why things were so bad last year and why that passing game was so short towards the end of the season. They need to invest in that offensive line, whether that's free agency, whether that's the draft, whether that's both. They got 3 picks in the top 41. I would imagine they're taking at least 1 or 2 linemen with those 3 picks. If not all, maybe throw one towards a defensive end, an edge rusher. But I think all those picks should be in the trenches. That's clearly where this team needs to improve. But I am really curious to see how, with the right environment, with the right offensive line, how Ben Johnson could utilize Caleb's mobility a little bit more.
Listen, it was interesting to say when Ben was asked about why he took the job, Caleb's a big part of it, but he also said this roster's stacked. He didn't want to get into why it didn't work. He wasn't trying to put the previous coaching staff run them under the bus or anything like that. But it's very clear that he believes that this team underachieved. We all believe that they underachieved, and they didn't take advantage of Caleb running the ball, like you said, or other talent that they have. So I think that's the biggest thing where Ben's going to bring out the best in everyone. And obviously that, like we talked about, and we'll keep talking about probably until we get started here in September, once you get the offensive line, obviously, hopefully that improves things. But there's a lot of talent on this team. This offense has been very heavily invested in. A lot of big contracts are there, and it underachieved. And that's going to be his biggest goal, is just trying to find the best out of everyone and trying to put them in the best position to succeed, because there's a lot of good things here, and it's just putting them in the right position instead of just molding them to a specific type of offense like we kind of saw previously happen.
Yeah, I think the really good offensive coordinators do exactly that, and we saw the Lions do that when Ben Johnson was running the offense, and I mean, too, the run game was obviously so impressive in Detroit. They invested heavily in that. They spent on a running back. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs with a first round pick. They traded up to do so. That's going to be just as important toward opening things up for Caleb as anything. If you can get that run game going, I know they invested in DeAndre Swift last offseason. That's an interesting one, because the Lions traded him away when Ben Johnson was the coordinator. I would be curious to hear what his thoughts are on DeAndre as a running back, if they're going to keep going in that direction, if they're going to look to add, maybe it's a case where you play with DeAndre for one more season and you also draft somebody and see what you can do there. But that's going to be a big part of this plan of attack too, because it's not just about the trick plays. It's not just about the creative ways to get Amon-Ra St. Brown the ball. It's just the hard-nosed running the ball and just what that opened up for Jared Goff in the passing game.
Well, I think that's why they were so successful, right? They were picking up yardage on first down runs. They were getting 4 or 5 yards, on average, where the Bears, struggled to pick up a yard and 2, and then usually set themselves up in second and long, and then, had an incompletion or short or whatever, or they, had a false start penalty or something, or holding, obviously, just based on how last year went. But, they're really, I think Ben realizes, and it helps, obviously, to have the offensive line, Jahmyr Gibbs. That obviously helps a lot. But I think Ben recognizes that, you're going to see a lot of trick plays. You're going to see a lot of gadget stuff. But you're also going to see just, basic stuff that we didn't see. You're going to see the run be more successful, hopefully, with a better offensive line. And he's going to be committed to that. He's not going to shy away from that, I don't think, as quickly as we maybe saw previously happen. So I think there are a lot of traits to success. Obviously, there's still I know a lot of guys are, hoping for a good offensive line coach, a good OC who can kind of support Ben Johnson. I see a lot of guys mentioning that, but I think the basic stuff is there and under the basic principles are there. Now it's just expanding upon that and making sure that you're kind of putting those guys in the best situation in order to, take advantage of both the basic stuff, but also the trick plays.
Yeah, definitely. We can, we will certainly dive into what sorts of players, what profiles will fit this offense down the line. But as some folks in the comments are saying, we'll have to see how Ben Johnson fills out his coaching staff. And certainly we will jump in and join you guys again when we get a little bit more clarity on what that's going to look like. It's a fun time to be a Bears fan. I know a lot of Bears fans are excited about this, as they should be. It's been a really fun week. It's been after obviously what was a really tough season. Bears fans finally got a victory. I think everybody's pretty happy with that.
Yeah, they definitely are, and they should be, right? Like it was a bad year. They underachieved. Nothing went right. There was drama, some drama off the field, obviously with, Tyreek Stevenson and a lot of people a couple of weeks ago were giving the Bears such a hard time nationally and everyone was surprised, but the Bears got a win. They got their, first win with getting Ben Johnson. It's exciting to see. I think this offseason will kind of mimic what last offseason was with Caleb Williams, right? Where you're excited to see who's he going to bring in as a DC? Who's this OC going to be? Like what lineman? Like we're going to be talking a lot of linemen, a lot of college lineman tape and a lot of NFL lineman tape is going to be broken down here. But I think it's going to be another fun offseason. And hopefully, Bears can win the offseason and actually start winning on the field as well.
So stick with us, guys. Head to shawlocal.com to read all of our work. You can read everything that's up there from yesterday's press conference. The number one best way to support us is to subscribe at shawlocal.com. If you're with us here on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. That's another great way to help us out. Leave us a review. Look for us on Spotify or Apple. A 5-star review would really help us out. And if you're listening after the fact on any other platform where you get your podcast, be sure to check out our Twitter pages. I'm at Sean_Hammond. He is at Dwojak94. We're going to let you know when we're going live. We were going to try to keep doing this at least once a week during the off season. We'll see what shakes out here over the next week. I'm sure we will get some hirings from Ben Johnson's staff. And when we do, we will jump on with you guys live. Thanks for everybody in the chats in the chat and the comments. We really appreciate you guys joining us here. This has been the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody.